Hello, I'm Sam Thayer, and we're here as part of Winchester Community Access and Media's ongoing public service announcements regarding the upcoming override. The issue we're going to focus on now is the question of whether the town finances are being efficiently and wisely managed. And with us to discuss that issue is Charles Nurnberger of the Town Selectmen. Chuck has been in town government since 1986. He's been on the Finance Committee for 3 years. He's been on the Planning Board for 3 years, including as its chairman, and we're just delighted to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Got 3 questions for you. One of them has to do with what were the results of the recent audits that were done on how efficiently the town's finances are being managed.
Well, thank you, Sam. Winchester, the Board of Selectmen believe that Winchester is already operating efficiently. There is simply no more fat to cut. And as evidence, I would ask for you to consider 3 points. Number one, we've had 2 independent audits have concluded that the town is being efficiently managed. Last April, when questions were raised about a possible override, the Board of Selectmen determined that first we need to assure the public and ourselves that the town government, including the schools, was operating efficiently and spending existing revenues prudently. To that end, the board created an independent commission made up of business professionals and others who are knowledgeable in the best business practices. The Financial Advisory Committee to the Selectmen, the FACTS Committee, produced a 250-page report that reviewed all town departments and makes many recommendations for process improvements and recommends fee increases. The FACTS Committee concluded that there is little opportunity for significant expense reductions without matching service reductions. Without substantial new revenues, the town will not be able to meet all of its foreseeable needs for services, maintenance, and capital infrastructure. The second independent audit was performed by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. This was done to ensure that if there were any ways in which we could improve our operations, practices, or procedures, that we would be made aware of it and be able to act on it. The Department of Revenue essentially confirmed the findings and recommendations of the FACTS Committee. Comparative economic data confirms Winchester's municipal expenses are below average and educational expenses are cost effective. The FACTS report calculated that the average per capita municipal spending of 23 comparative towns is 19% higher than Winchester's spending. If we say it another way, Winchester's actually spending 16% below other towns. Winchester's municipal spending is $2,400 per capita. The average for the other 23 towns, Sam, was $2,900. Educational spending per pupil is about equal to the average for the 23 communities. We're about 4% higher for regular education and 9% lower for special education. Winchester's regular education is $6,200. The special needs about $10,800. The average for the 23 comparative towns is about $6,000 for regular education and $11,800 for special education.
Has the town done anything to try and save more money and make things more productive?
Well, that's a great question, Sam. Thank you. The town manager of the Board of Selectmen have initiated many cost savings, financial productivity plans, and more improvement planned. Streetlights will be brought in-house for savings of between $75,000 and $100,000 annually. Last spring, the town joined an energy consortium of communities, saving $50,000 on the energy budget for FY02. The school department established in-house special education programs to meet mandates that are estimated to be saving the town a lot of money on private placement tuitions. The town is studying the options of having in-house ambulance capabilities to save on the use of outside ambulance services. Building maintenance for schools and towns have been integrated. The town manager is recommending a proposed town government streamlining that would include a centralized business manager of the school and town, eliminating one current financial position. To merge 3 existing departments to form a planning and economic department. Establish a joint school and municipal personnel department to improve employee management, business management, and contract matters. So to sum it up, Sam, the town is doing a great job, we think. We're using our resources very efficiently. There's simply no more fat to cut out of the budget and it's time now to step up to the plate and do the right thing.
Thank you, Chuck. Please watch for more of these public service announcements related to the upcoming override.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Good evening, Winchester. Selectman Nurnberger has visited recently with you to support his decision to vote for the proposed overrides, trying to convince you to do the same. A group of taxpayers in town feel it only fair we take a few moments to present the whole story. Let's talk about the two overrides on this year's town ballot and state the obvious. Money is not at the root of our present fiscal challenge, and excessive taxes are not going to solve our problems. We are being told these additional funds from the overrides will solve everything from icy sidewalks to the pruning of trees. We use statistics and commentary from the pages of town documents. These are public records. They are not invented, fabricated, or fuzzy, so you can confirm our statements for yourself. Mr. Nurnberger interprets the FACTS recommendations as being supportive of an efficient operation. However, that report is also highly critical of leadership and management practices in Winchester. The report did compliment individual department heads and how they cope with crisis management. Facts Public Hearing 1100. Department heads are being reported as forced into being reactors, firefighters, not visionaries because of the lack of long-range planning or policies addressing operations. According to pages 24 to 27 in the report, the superintendent spends vast amounts of time on day-to-day administrative issues surrounding the school system and consequently less time actually driving educational excellence. Accountability is seriously lacking, as evidenced by Facts interviews with the superintendent, who could not account for specific expenditures by program. Without budget processes, information is not available and controls are inadequate. Overall, town leadership has failed to produce a comprehensive strategic plan, which causes departments to assume defensive and entrenched operating practices. The budget process, according to Facts, is a rancorous one without guidelines, benchmarks, or establishment of best practices, resulting in debated decision-making rather than consensus building. This type of strained environment polarizes the issues and is the basis for mistrust among officials and residents. Facts recommendations are being selectively implemented without an organized or cohesive plan. All in all, these findings cannot possibly be construed as favorable. Voters of Winchester, we have a leadership and management crisis in our town, and the problem is not about having enough money. Our problem is that decision-making is in the hands of those using uninformed and arbitrary criteria in assigning their priorities. Without a well-defined and accountable process in place, the decisions will of course be flawed. Our officials should have learned from the past 10 years of mistakes in budgeting for a few special interests and not for the entire community. They greased the squeaky wheels, and now they ask us for more money. They are now compounding those mistakes and making the problem worse by creating a budget dependent on an increased tax base. The burden is an unrealistic one to place on each one of us. Since town officials are unable or unwilling to apply fiscal discipline to their management decisions, we must adopt stewardship of the town and do it for them. Consistent with the Facts recommendations, we need to understand clearly what the goals, objectives, and measures are before we hand more hard-earned cash to them. Take the responsible action for every resident on March 27. Vote with your neighbors and vote no on each question found on the back of the ballot. Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Hi, I'm George Wood. and thanks for joining us. This is another one of WinCam's public service announcements. And this segment is going to focus on the upcoming override on March 27th. Remember to get out and vote. And also to answer the questions about the impact of the override on our community and how we're going to pay for it. With me tonight is Carl Friesel, who is a selectman in our town. Carl also formerly served on the town's finance committee for 5 years, was also chair of that committee for one of those years, is a town meeting member in good standing in Precinct 7. Carl, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Carl, all the viewers, I think, have a very basic question. What is the override? Can you give us the overview and help us understand it better?
Sure. The override is two separate questions. We've asked for a general increase in taxes for the fiscal year 2002 beginning July 1st of this year, and then the next fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2002. Each year, the same amount of money, $1.95 million, a total of $3.9 million over that 2-year period. And it's really two principal areas that will be addressed in those monies. Repair, maintenance projects and capital improvement projects, and then an almost equal amount in the schools, and then a somewhat lesser amount in other municipal departments, the DPW personnel, some policemen, and additional hours at the library are really the principal focus.
Well, we've been doing a lot of work on our schools in this town.
Yes.
Are we going to get to work on our sidewalks and streets?
Right, it's time to do that, and we will. What this program will address, if we get these additional funds, are repair of our streets and sidewalks and our fields, the open space in this town, which makes it the kind of quality environment that we enjoy, and actually do such things as prune trees, which we haven't done in many years, and a lot of the citizens have complained about that, but we'll be able to start making some headway even there.
And there'll be a lot of trees need pruning after these
Yes.
storms this week.
Absolutely.
The selectmen all support this override, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit on those reasons?
Sure. We appointed a special committee about a year ago called the Financial Advisory Committee to the selectmen, which issued a report in the fall in October, and they, in that report, made it very clear that because of the financial difficulties of the town over the last 10 years in particular, there's been a very serious shortage of funds for repair, maintenance, and capital projects in this town. And as we all know, if you properly maintain your capital plant and your equipment like a car, and you change the oil, the filter, the engine will run longer and better, and if you don't, you'll have to replace the engine. Our policy's been to replace engines rather than replacing the oil and the filter. It's time to change that.
Great, Carl, thank you. Now, how are we going to pay for this? What impact is it going to have on us as homeowners, on our taxes in this town?
Sure. We've looked at it from the perspective of the median assessed value, which is $370,000 in this town, and it really will have an impact in each year of an additional $243 in taxes. And after your federal tax deduction, that's $175. So for both years, that's $350.
And it certainly should have an impact on the value of our homes.
We think it will have a very positive return on the value of your home. The quality of our schools, the quality of the environment in this town, are what keep people wanting to live in this town and move to this town.
It's a great place to be, Carl.
Yes.
For people who want to know more about this, could you let them know how to get a hold of
Sure.
you and the other members of the Selectmen Committee?
Sure. Selectmen will be featuring one aspect of this override each of the next 3 meetings at the very beginning of our meetings every Monday night, which starts about 8 o'clock. But in addition, they can call any one of us on the board. You can call me at 729-8907. And we're going to go in the next couple of Saturdays out to meet the voters by being available downtown, and also we'll be available at the transfer station. So people can just walk up and come and ask us any question they have.
And hopefully you'll help us empty the trash out of the back of the cars.
Well, we'll try.
Thank you very much, Carl, and thank you for joining this public service announcement. There will be others coming up in the future, and please stay tuned to watch them. Thanks again.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Good evening, Winchester. Selectman Friesel visited with you recently to support his decision to vote for the proposed overrides and try to convince you to do the same. A group of taxpayers feel it only fair that we use a few moments to present the whole story. Let's talk about the two overrides on this year's town ballot and state the obvious. Money is not at the root of our present fiscal challenges, and excessive taxes are not going to solve our problems. We are being told that these additional funds from the overrides will solve everything from icy sidewalks to the pruning of trees. Mr. Friesel specifies the expenditure categories which will be addressed by the general overrides, but falls short of explaining that general override funds, by law, are not earmarked for specific items. He reaffirms the imbalance of money allocations. He mentions three categories of funding with new tax revenues: one for repair, maintenance, and capital projects, another for education, and a third for municipal services. In his distribution of monies, he underfunds municipal needs, while half of the generated revenue ends up in the school department once again. Page 1-1 of the Finance Committee's budget for 2001 asks the question, can we consider that the portion of funds handed over to the Education Department totaling $29,444,000, or 58% of the total tax revenue for our towns, is creating extreme stress on our bank account? Mr. Friesel's distribution comments echo the same budget allocation practices of the past. If memory serves us well, 3 of our selectmen were members and 2 were even chairpersons of the finance committees when decisions were made to propose budgets that would subtract funds from an entire municipal infrastructure, streets, police, fire, maintenance, and so on. Monies were shifted from one account to another without long-range plans or accountability measures, control, or standards. The same officials who made the dangerous decisions back then are trying to convince us to trust them again now. Voters of Winchester, we have a leadership and management crisis in our town, and the problem is not having enough money. Our problem is that decision-making is in the hands of those using uninformed and arbitrary criteria in assigning their priorities. Without a well-defined and accountable process, the decisions will of course be flawed. Our officials should have learned from the past 10 years of mistakes in budgeting for a few special interests and not for the entire community. They greased the squeaky wheels and now ask for more money. They are now compounding those mistakes and making the problem worse by creating a budget dependent on an increased tax base. The burden is an unrealistic one to place on each one of us. Since town officials are unable or unwilling to apply fiscal discipline to their management decisions, we must adopt the stewardship of the town and do it for them. We need to understand clearly what the goals, objectives, and measures are before we hand more hard-earned cash to them. Take the responsible action for every resident on March 27. Vote with neighbors and vote no on each question found on the back of the ballot. Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Hello, I'm Sam Thayer with another public service announcement about the upcoming override. With me to discuss this important issue is Betsy Krager. Welcome, Betsy. Betsy is a town selectman, has been for 2 years. She was before that on the town finance committee, where she was the chairman for 1 year. She was on the finance committee for 6 years.
That's correct.
She's an independent financial professional, a CPA, so she's very well qualified to help us assess what the override is all about and its impact on Winchester. And that's really, I think, where I'd like to start, Betsy. For many people, the question is, well, what if the override isn't passed? What would the impact be on the typical family or person in Winchester?
Well, there's lots of ways in which people use municipal services, of course, all the time, whether it's, just driving down the street using the library perhaps, using the tennis courts, or just dropping the kids off to school, even turning on a water faucet. Believe it or not, that's a municipal service. And a lot of people tend to forget it because it sort of goes into the fabric of everyday life. But in fact, there are many departments that will be pretty radically impacted by that. One of the things that we've noted, particularly on the Board of Selectmen, we've been very distressed by the deterioration of our roads, sidewalks, and our public buildings. And that's the result of a couple of different factors. We had some major cuts in our DPW budgets in particular, as well as in our capital budgets about 10 years ago. Municipal spending guidelines would suggest that we ought to be spending about $2.5 million annually from our operating budget on capital. And that's for, fairly major projects, for roads, sidewalks, buildings, all of those sorts of items. They're sort of larger projects that you and I often have to undertake for our own homes, in fact. But in fact, our budgets for those items on the capital side have only been about $300,000 a year or so. And that's resulted in deteriorating conditions in all of those areas. That's been a big problem. If the override is passed, in fact, though, we'll be looking at an additional $750,000 in those areas. And while that won't get us out all the way there, it will certainly be a big help. And in terms just of our building maintenance, if the override doesn't pass, we'll be losing 4 DPW positions. That is very significant. Because of that, it's very important that we can keep those positions and even add an additional position in building maintenance and stop the effects of that deferred maintenance that we have done over the last several years.
Why is it so important that the override be passed now? We've waited a couple of years, couple more years to make some of these capital improvements that you've mentioned. Why is it necessary that we do it now?
Because, in fact, things are continuing to get worse. I get comments from people all the time on the condition of the roads, the condition of the sidewalks. If we don't do this, our whole sidewalk replacement program will be eliminated. Mm-hmm. This is significant. We already really don't provide services for our open space. Our fields aren't maintained adequately either. Mm-hmm. The library budget will take a significant hit. Hours will be reduced. And the book budget will probably consist mostly of what we can purchase with trust funds. So if you like the occult books or perhaps Civil War books, you're in business. But otherwise, I think you're going to want to seriously consider voting for the override because, in fact, hours will be expanded. There will be more Sunday hours and more books will be available for a broader reading public. I think that will help. But the schools are probably impacted very, very heavily. You'll be looking, in fact, at cutting positions, at increased class sizes and increased fees. With the override, existing personnel will be retained. There will be probably some additions just to account for enrollment growth at the high school and the middle school. And additionally, there will be funds available for professional development and textbook replacement, for example. All of these areas are very important. We also want to be able to increase our public safety. We'd be able to, with the override passage, we would be able to increase our public safety by 1 officer, and that would be a significant help as well. Youth services and senior services would also be impacted positively by passage of the override. So it's really very broad-ranging and impacts almost everybody at some level.
And similarly, if we don't pass the override, then those negative impacts will be felt pretty broadly across the whole spectrum of town services.
You bet, young to old.
Okay.
It will impact everybody.
Well, in summary, is there anything that you want to say as far as what you'd recommend the town voters do?
Well, I would like for the voters to think very, very seriously about their vote on March 27th. Unfortunately, the town has no recourse but to come to its taxpayers for help. And a lot of this has to do with how you, the taxpayer, want your town to be. If we want to retain our traditions of Winchester as a well-maintained, ably organized town, frankly, the passage of the override will help that significantly.
Okay, thank you. Betsy Krager, Town Selectman. She and the other selectmen encourage you to call them if you have any opinions or questions about the override issue, and you can see their numbers on your screen now. Thanks.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Good evening, Winchester. Selectwoman Krager has recently visited with you to support her decision to vote for the proposed overrides and try to convince you to do the same. A group of taxpayers feel it only fair that we take a few moments to present the whole story. Let's talk about the two overrides on this year's town ballot and state the obvious. Money is not at the root of our present fiscal challenges, and excessive taxes are not going to solve our problems. We are being told that these additional funds from the overrides will solve everything, from icy sidewalks to the pruning of trees. We will be using statistics and commentary from the pages of town documents. These are public records. They are not invented, fabricated, or fuzzy, so you can confirm our statements for yourself. According to page 1-1 of the town manager's budget, the 2001 budget shows almost $52 million, creating despair among leaders who claim they do not have enough to meet the needs of a town with fewer than 8,000 households. Ms. Krager assures crippling effects on education services. The premise must be seriously questioned. According to pages 4-229, 236, 244, and 285 of the program budget, the sums of $964,000 and $296,000 and $242,000 and $381,000 are proposed for the school department under unspecified additions in the 2002 budget. These funds would go to the superintendent's office, Winchester High School, McCall, and special education respectively, without any explanations about how or where they are going to spend it. The total of $1,883,000 would equal the amount being requested in one of the overrides. This amount represents 7% of the education budget, which, when added to the central office budget, representing 11%, totals 18% of unaccounted funds. On page 4-73 of the town manager's budget and on 4-227 of the program budget, the superintendent requested an increase of $489,000 in 2002, while spending $412,000 more than budgeted in the year 2000. We support quality education, faculty, and programs, but not mismanagement. The proposed budget goes further by expanding the superintendent's office computer supply account from $32,000 in 2001 to $214,000 in 2002, at a time when we are told our students are using 40-year-old textbooks. The high school account for the same item increases from $3,000 to $214,000, as stated on pages 4-230, 237 of the program budget. While Ms. Krager served as member and chair of the Finance Committee, she and others had a choice, but more importantly, a vote, to stop the disproportionate allocations in services. We are facing the challenging results now, accompanied by an opportunity to avoid further damage to our way of life. Voters in Winchester, we have a leadership and management crisis in our town, and the problem is not having enough money. Our problem is that decision-making is in the hands of those using uninformed and arbitrary criteria in assigning their priorities. Without a well-defined and accountable process, the decisions will of course be flawed. Our officials should have learned from the past 10 years of mistakes in budgeting for a few special interests and not for the entire community. They greased the squeaky wheels, and now they ask us for more money. They are now compounding those mistakes and making the problem worse by creating a budget dependent on an increased tax base. The burden is an unrealistic one to place on each one of us. Since town officials are unable or unwilling to apply fiscal discipline to their management decisions, we must adopt the stewardship of the town and do it for them. Consistent with the fact's recommendations, we need to understand clearly what the goals, objectives, and measures are before we hand more hard-earned cash to them. Take the responsible action for every resident on March 27th. Vote with neighbors and vote no on each question found on the back of the ballot. Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Hello, I'm Sam Thayer with this public service announcement about the upcoming override. With us to discuss the issue is Priscilla Owen McPhee. Priscilla, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Sam.
Priscilla is both a town meeting member, which she's been for 7 or 8 years, as well as a selectman, which she's been now for 3 years. And what we'd like you to focus on, Priscilla, if you would, is how have we gotten to the point where we are asking voters to approve such significant overrides, $1.95 million for both the fiscal year 02 and for fiscal year 03?
Clearly, if we go back and examine the historical spending patterns of our community over the past decade, what we see is that we have not been able to sustain a sufficient level of revenue in order to keep pace with our growing costs in terms of expenditures. And we look at expenditures largely through 2 vehicles. One is to look at capital maintenance, which is maintenance of our buildings, our infrastructure, which is our roadways and sidewalks, and our capital replacement, which is for equipment that we need to repair or replace. In addition to that, we have rising personnel costs, which are associated with the providing of town services. Beyond that pattern, what we've also noted is a significant decline. Over almost 20 years ago, we had a much larger portion of our local revenue derived from commercial and industrial base, and that shrunk from about 13% back in 1983, I think, to where it is today, which is just barely 6%. Mm-hmm. So the burden falls upon the local taxpayer to support and to provide us with levels of revenue. Now, in addition to that, while we have had some increased levels of state aid, particularly in the last 5 years, and we've also gone to one-time sources of revenue such as sale of land, these and the raising of fees, these in and of themselves are still not enough to be able to contain the growing deficit that we see in our operating budget. And that deficit has been projected conservatively by the town manager to be growing from fiscal year 02 from about $1.5 million to fiscal year 06, where it's at over $5 million.
Wow, and that's a conservative estimate.
That is a conservative estimate that doesn't even address a marginally acceptable level of capital improvements and does not address the level of services that we need to put in place to address new needs. In addition to that, we have certain fixed costs which have risen extraordinarily, and I think many people at home will appreciate the budget busters called energy costs, trash disposal, and health insurance, all of which have risen dramatically. And these are fixed costs that we have to absorb and pay for, irrespective of what we have for revenues in the operating budget. So those costs have to come out right off the top.
So we have these rising costs, we have these declining commercial tax revenues. Why haven't we passed more significant overrides before?
I think what we've tried to do is the approach that I like to say we've taken is to retrofit the budget. We've taken what revenues we had and then we took our needs and tried to force them into, if you will, the monies that we had available. But that has had a significant impact on the municipal side with respect to capital improvements.
So it sounds like you're urging voters to vote in favor of the proposed overrides. Is that correct?
I would. I think the town has a proud history of being a well-managed and a well-run town. I think there's an expectation on the part of the people who live in this community that we will continue to provide a level of service and a level of maintenance for our buildings, which we've invested considerable assets. And that in order to go forward with that, we're simply going to have to raise local revenues in order to meet that burgeoning expense.
Okay, Priscilla, thank you. Town
you very
Selectman
much.
Priscilla Owen McPhee. She and the other selectmen encourage you to call her or them at their numbers listed on your screen now if you have any questions or comments about the upcoming override. Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media. We welcome opposing viewpoints.
Good evening, Winchester. Selectwoman McPhee has visited with you recently to support her decision to vote for the proposed overrides and try to convince you to do the same. A group of taxpayers feel it only fair we use a few moments to present the whole story. Let's talk about the two overrides on this year's town ballot and state the obvious. Money is not at the root of our present fiscal challenges, and excessive taxes are not going to solve our problems. We are being told that these additional funds from the overrides will solve everything from icy sidewalks to the pruning of trees. Revenue shortfalls have been projected consistently for the last several years, but town officials continue to spend without attempting to find long-term solutions. Today, they propose to fix 10 years' worth of accumulated problems by throwing money at them, still without plans or innovative ideas. The Strategic Planning Committee, recommended by the facts report on page 27-25, is beginning to take form because Winchester has no centralized means of evaluating long-term projects and costs. We are unable to prepare an orderly approach to addressing funding issues. The burden to improve management practices in our town does not belong on the shoulders of local taxpayers who have entrusted their town to the elected officials. Municipal services to all residents have been abandoned for 10 years, while more and more funds have been allocated to the school department budget. This 2001 budget allocated $3,100,000 for the central office of the school department. This amount is roughly equal to that allocated for the needs of our DPW, serving the entire town of 20,000 residents. While the local commercial and industrial-based revenue decreased by 7%, state aid increased at an average rate of 11.4% per year from $2,859,000 in 1995 to $4,906,000 in 2000. The estimated deficit is clearly a result of misallocated revenues and misguided focus. Tax-paying residents should not pay the price so many times over for the mistakes of town officials. Voters of Winchester, we have a leadership and management crisis in our town, and the problem is not about having enough money. Our problem is that decision-making is in the hands of those using uninformed and arbitrary criteria in assigning their priorities. Without a well-defined and accountable process, the decisions will, of course, be flawed. Our officials should have learned from the past 10 years of mistakes in budgeting a few special interests and not for the entire community. They greased the squeaky wheels, and now they ask us for more money. They are compounding those mistakes and making the problem worse by creating a budget dependent on an increased tax base. The burden is an unrealistic one to place on each of us. The two general overrides will not be the last word in tax increases, as clearly stated on page 26-10 of the town manager's budget. There are 6 more debt exclusion packages scheduled over the next 8 years. If they are supported, many of us will share the expected outcome of being forced out of our homes. Since town officials are unable or unwilling to apply fiscal discipline to their management decisions, we must adopt the stewardship of the town and do it for them. We need to understand clearly what the goals, objectives, and measures are before we hand more hard-earned cash to them. Take the responsible action for every resident on March 27th. Vote with neighbors and vote no on each question found on the back of the ballot. Thank you.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the producers and are not necessarily those of Winchester Community Access and Media.